attributes of God. Some universal stuff in the government, but yeah. It's interesting.
Alrighty, y'all. I think we're gonna get started. Welcome to Ratio Christi. Tonight we're pleased to host Justice for All. They're a great pro-life group, and they've come and they're just gonna talk about how we can have good conversations about abortion and go about those conversations in following 1 Peter 3:15 with gentleness and respect, while also standing firm on the truth. And I'll pray us in, and then one thing. Yes, we have the Ratio Christi retreat coming up. The sign-up deadline is a week from now, but it's super helpful for us if you sign up as soon as you can, so we can get a good idea of everyone who's coming. And again, the details on that is it's going to be about half an hour west into the mountains, and it's going to be a manuscript study where you're just going to be given the text of a book of the Bible, no chapter numbers, no verse numbers, and you're just going to pick it apart. It's going to be really fun. So definitely come if you're interested. The cost is $20 per person. That's just to cover food. Alrighty, with that, I'll pray us in and then hand it over. Dear God, thank you for just allowing us to come together tonight to have this conversation that's just so incredibly important. God, I pray that we can just recognize the value of all life that you've made and the uniqueness of every single human life from the moment that we're formed in the womb. And I pray, God, that you'll just bless speakers tonight, bless our hearts and our ears to learn and see these conversations and how to go about them. I pray, God, that we can go forth afterwards and have these conversations with all gentleness and respect and just looking at your truth and spreading that, and ultimately just helping those who are in the darkness see the truth of how wonderful you are and your love for each and every one of us. In your holy name I pray. Amen. Alrighty. Oh, and also there's snacks over there, including what was it, Heidi?
Tropical scones.
Tropical scones.
Coconut, two kinds of nuts, macadamia nuts and pecans.
Definitely check that out.
It's really great to be with you all tonight. Like you said, my name is Christine and I work with Justice for All. And my job and the job of my colleagues and I is to teach Christians how to have productive conversations about abortion. So the question on the screen that we're sort of asking tonight is creating a better conversation about abortion possible? You might imagine, based on what I do, that I have an answer to that question. I believe the answer is yes, and I hope to show you tonight why I believe that answer. I'm going to make some claims tonight. It's totally fine if you guys disagree with that. This group is about exploring what the truth is about things and thinking about why we believe what we believe. So if you're coming from a perspective that's different than mine, it's great that you're here, and I'm really glad that you're here, and I really invite your questions. So whether you agree with everything I'm saying or nothing that I'm saying or somewhere in between, which is what probably most of us are, right, when it comes to other people's beliefs, feel free to ask questions, and we want to just have a dialogue here tonight as well. So I'm going to start. So I've just spent 3 days last week and a day this week, or the week before last, having conversations on campus with students about the topic of abortion. And we usually ask students a sort of yes or no question: should abortion remain legal? And we have people come up and share their thoughts about abortion. And as you might imagine, it gets heated sometimes, right? People have been harmed by abortion, and they have experiences related to abortion and related to their bodies. Somebody asked me at CSU, actually this came up in a number of conversations, and the question was sort of along the lines of what is the point of what you're doing? What are you trying to achieve? And somebody asked it this way, what is the real world impact of what you're trying to do? And it was interesting to me to process that question because I used to live in Boulder within 3 miles of 3 different abortion providers. So I found out that within 3 minutes of where I worked, went to church, and slept every night, there were medical providers who were intentionally inducing abortions in women with the intention that they leave their clinic or whatever, that process, without something in their bodies, right? And so as a result of one of those clinics, so one of those clinics was a late-term abortion, a doctor. He did abortions late in pregnancy. He's done it for the last 50 years, just retired. And he said when he retired that he had seen about 45,000 patients within the last 50 years. So if you do the math on that, that's a significant impact in my community related to abortion. Whether I think abortion's okay or I'm not, it is deeply impacting human beings, right? So this particular doctor, there's actually a memorial wall in Boulder for the unborn where approximately 5,500, the bodies or the remains of 5,500 babies are buried from just 5.5 years of abortions at that clinic. So these are babies who had Down syndrome. These are babies that had trisomy 18. These are babies that were female instead of male. All of these reasons that this doctor says he performed abortions. And so to me, I'm thinking when someone said, what is the impact in your community of what you're trying to do? I'm thinking of the mothers that delivered these babies not alive anymore. And I'm thinking of the babies themselves, human beings. And I'm thinking, oh, I think there's a huge impact because the question of should this thing that this doctor did remain legal depends on what was growing in these women when they were pregnant and what happened to them between when they went to that clinic and they left the clinic and or finished the procedure or medication, right? So that's a question we're going to explore tonight because it's relevant to this topic. And I think we can explore it together in a way where we treat each other as human beings that have value and dignity and worth and whose opinions matter and whose bodies matter. So that's where we're going. And I'm going to start here. Justice for All seeks to love those with personal experience, whether that's related to pregnancy or abortion or both. We seek to love the unborn child, and then we seek to love the person that disagrees with us equally at every point in every conversation. So that's just where I am coming from. Feel free to disagree with me on that. So I think yes, the answer is yes. Now, how is it possible to have good conversations? This is where we're headed. In every conversation, I think it's really important to be relationally sensitive, recognizing honestly how intimately and deeply people have been impacted by this thing in our society. And not just by abortion, but by relationships, sex, pregnancy, all of that. The next thing is to be intellectually honest about what pregnancy involves, about what happens in an abortion, and the biological facts related to human development, human reproduction. We can look at that sort of objectively from a scientific perspective, what's going on here, and we can be honest about that, the facts related to that, right? And then the third is I want to approach every fellow human being that I have, and we're going to utilize what I'm going to call the JFA 3 essential skills that we're going to teach you tonight in every conversation about abortion. And those skills I'm hoping are going to help you not just in conversations about abortion, but also in conversations about a lot of different topics where people disagree about them, okay? Another thing, really important in every conversation, to clarify your terms or define your terms and ask the question often, what do you mean by, or do you mean this? And actually state the other person's opinion in a way that they're saying, yes, that is what I mean. When it comes to this topic, we throw around terms like abortion, pro-choice, pro-life, embryo, fetus, unborn, preborn, babies, child, right? Children. And we want to make sure the other person is looking at those words the same way that we are when we're in the conversation. And if they're not, we want to meet the person where they're at and understand where they're coming from. For example, with the term abortion, right now in our society, there's a lot of things that are being defined as abortion. And it's important to know, is the person that I'm talking to really concerned about women who've had miscarriages, who might need health care related to their miscarriage when the baby and the fetus or embryo, however you want to call that, has died in utero? Or are they only concerned about elective induced abortion? So we want to define, okay, because one might consider something an abortion, another might consider something else, and people define these things differently. Does that make sense? Pro-choice, same way, pro-life. So tonight, for the purpose of this conversation, when I use the term pro-choice, I'm referring to someone who, generally speaking, thinks abortion should remain legal, generally. And pro-life, I'm going to mean generally that's someone who thinks abortion should remain not legal, okay? And if you look on page 4 in your interactive guide, we've given you an interactive guide. We're going to follow along with that tonight. Feel free to flip to page 4. It describes a little bit of some of the language and the terminology that we're going to use and where we're coming from, but just recognize that people come from this from different perspectives. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, if you look at the screen right now, it might be a little small, but hopefully you can read it. There's people that have lots of different opinions about abortion, right? And it ranges beyond this screen right here. But they might say it's just a surgery, it's not wrong, it should be legal, all the way to I'm actually super concerned about the fact that abortion kills a human being. And as a result of that, I feel responsible to speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves, and therefore I'm actively taking and creating opportunities to change hearts and minds through conversation to bring about the protection for the unborn. And sort of everything in between. So I'm imagining if you're looking at the screen, you probably fit in somewhere here on this line. And the question I have for you tonight is, are you willing to move along that line at all if you're staunchly somewhere? And if so, what are the reasons for that? And thinking through what's actually true, not just what I think about something, what you think about something, but what's actually consistent with reality as God created it, or as it exists if you don't believe God created it. Does that make sense? Okay. One more thing I want to say before we dive in. I know that this topic has hurt a lot of people. So if you're someone who either yourself or someone in your life has been harmed by abortion or gone through a really tragic, traumatic situation related to pregnancy or abortion, I just want to recognize that this can be a really hard conversation to have and a really difficult topic to talk about. I don't know everybody's story, but I know with the amount of abortions that occur that most of us have been touched by abortion in some way in our families or otherwise. And so tonight, if you need resources related to processing an experience that you had, even with the relationship or something like that, feel free to reach out. We also have some resources in the interactive guide. Pregnancy centers are great at talking to men and women who've had experiences related to an abortion, so feel free to look on our website for resources for that. We also, a colleague of mine works with Deeper Still, which is an abortion retreat recovery ministry. So if you know people in your life who you meet on campus who are super passionate about this and you find out the reason for that is they lost a child to an abortion, feel free to recommend some of these resources. And you can also see some tips on page 41 of your interactive guide to just minister to people who've been impacted by this. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to give you sort of a biblical case where I'm coming from for why I think inducing a medical provider inducing death in a human being is not what something God wants. And I'm going to put up some verses here to do that. Can you guys read that? It's pretty small. So basically, human beings are valuable. They're made in God's image. They have a God-given right to life from the moment they come into existence until their natural death. God says in the Bible not to kill innocent human beings. There's some scripture references here from Genesis, Exodus. You shall not murder. Do not kill the innocent and righteous. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. Abortion kills an innocent human being if what I'm talking about is inducing abortion when everything's fine, mom's fine, baby's fine, and we do something intentionally to end the life of the baby when no one else's life is at risk, that kills an innocent human being, and therefore it's wrong. I also think the Bible teaches very clearly that children are a blessing, and losing a child, it makes sense that that results in grief, because children are a gift from the Lord. It says in Psalm 127:3, the fruit of the womb is a reward. So we have evidence from Scripture that that's sort of the design in families. Christians are called to defend those who can't defend themselves. So there's lots of verses in Psalms and Proverbs and other places about speaking up for those who can't speak up for themselves, defending the weak and the fatherless, upholding the cause of the poor and oppressed, rescuing those who are staggering towards slaughter. That verse says, rescue those who have been taken away to death, hold back those who are stumbling to the slaughter. If you say, behold, we did not know this, does not he who weighs the heart perceive it, and does not he who keep watch over your soul know it, and will he not repay man according to his work? We're called in Proverbs 31, speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute, speak up, judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Obviously, these verses don't just refer to innocent human beings being killed. There's lots of places these verses come in to context right here. But they do apply when it comes to abortion if what's growing in a woman is a human being, okay? Abortion has harmed this world, but we serve a God who died on the cross for our sins. Jesus came, he took on our human flesh as an embryo that grew into a fetus that then was born, that then became an infant, toddler, child, adolescent, adult, right? And then because of who he was killed and crucified, buried, and he rose again. Because of what he did in that, the gospel says that healing is possible, and he took up our pain and he took up our suffering. He bore all of that. And so that's something I want to remember whenever I talk about the topic of abortion, because I just don't want to come to a world that's been told, hey, you have this right, it's part of who you are as a woman, and this thing happened and now you're grappling with, did I kill my child, did I not? You're telling me that this thing I did should be illegal. What does that mean for me because I did it? If we don't give the message of, yeah, I think abortion is wrong and we should maybe not do it, without also telling people the remedy of the gospel at the same time, you're gonna dig up this wound and leave people sitting there with their wound and no remedy. And so I really encourage you, when you're talking abortion, to bring the gospel into a conversation for anyone who's experienced the loss of a child. Now, even someone who experienced the loss through a miscarriage or something like that, they need the gospel. They need to know that, you know what, this horrible thing happened in my life. It makes sense that we live in a world full of sin, and sin's impacts are just rampant in this world. And because of sin, we have death, and because of death, we grieve. But that's not how God intended this world to be, and that's not how, when he redeems this world fully, this world is going to be, right? And so we're working to a world where there will be no death, there will be no sorrow, there will be no pain, and that's relevant to this conversation to anyone that you're talking to. Okay, how do we speak up for those who can't speak for themselves in a way in this world where often this conversation starts really high, elevated up here, people super angry, super upset on both sides, if you want to say there are two sides, right? Well, I'm gonna bring Noah up here. We're gonna model some conversation. So what happens often when the conversation about abortion starts is it can sometimes be really good, and it can sometimes be bad, and then sometimes it can be just downright ugly. So we're gonna model these kinds of conversations. I want you to just evaluate them and see what you think about them. So let's just pretend Noah and I are friends, and we're talking about something, and the topic turns towards abortion. So that's where we're at, and I'm gonna say, hey Noah, what do you think about abortion?
I would generally say that I'm pro-choice.
Oh, so you're pro-abortion.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there's circumstances I think that people go through that sometimes.
So you hate babies.
No, I didn't say
You think that somebody should choose to kill their child.
No, I'm not saying that they should kill their child. I'm saying that there's hard circumstances and things that people go through that maybe.
You think that circumstances should make a person be able to go to a doctor and have that doctor inject injection into somebody's heart and actually kill that child.
No, I'm not saying
You know
that
what
they should be able
you know
to-
what you remind me of? You remind me of the people that during the Holocaust they buried their heads in the sand and
Are
they
you-
just ignored what Hitler was doing.
Are
and
you
they didn't
seriously
speak
like
up for
calling
human
me a
beings.
Nazi
I
right
am.
now?
I think if the shoe fits, you should wear it.
Okay.
Alright, good, bad, ugly.
Oh, ugly.
Ugly, I agree with you.
Could have been handled better.
Totally. Why was it ugly?
Interrupting immediately and not hearing the full side of their story, even when you disagree with them, not hearing what they have to offer.
Right. Interrupting. Yep, not letting someone finish their thought.
Ad hominem attacks against the person and not their or understanding their arguments.
Yep. Attacking the person. How did I attack him?
Calling him a Nazi.
Called him some names. Yep. What else?
Straw manning his argument into a very general idea of what he was thinking instead of actually listening to it.
Defining his argument for him instead of just letting him talk and tell me what he thought. Okay? What else?
You also took the most extreme, extreme interpretation of what he was saying and threw that back at him as, you're saying this.
Okay? Took a very extreme case. Did I even know what his view was? No. I just assumed a lot of things. So we're making a lot of assumptions. What was the general temperature of the I wouldn't even call it a conversation of what just happened.
Pretty odd.
Why? Right. Okay. What other thoughts do you have? So fortunately, this kind of conversation doesn't happen all the time. It may happen sometimes, but thankfully, this is the kind of conversation that doesn't happen all the time. I'm gonna model a different kind of conversation that happens sometimes more frequently, and I want you to evaluate it. So Noah, what do you think about abortion?
I would generally say that I'm pro-choice.
Okay. If the unborn is growing, it must be alive, and if it has human parents, it must be human. And human beings like you and me are valuable, aren't they?
Yeah, I generally would agree with that. I just think there's circumstances sometimes a woman's in a really, really difficult place, or maybe she can't provide financially, or when you look at the orphan system and other things, it's just really tough. And so sometimes not bringing somebody into that situation might seem like, I think, alleviating some of the pain and hardship that somebody's going through.
So it seems like there's a lot of differences between us and the unborn. For example, the unborn's not self-aware in the same way that we are. But then again, an infant isn't self-aware either. So being self-aware probably isn't relevant. It must not be relevant to our value.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that isn't that is the case, but what I'm looking at is a woman seems to have really difficult situations that I think we have to factor into this decision and decide what's best for her and for the child and the circumstance that they're in.
There are about 1 million abortions that take place in the US a year, of what we know happens. And so that's like, what, 2,500 a day? I don't know, I have to do the math, but
Yeah,
1 million.
it sounds like you know a lot about this, but I still think there's just something that we have to talk about regarding like the mother's experience and what she's able to do and the resources that are available to her and that sort of stuff that I think we have to factor into this conversation.
So embryologists O'Reilly and Mueller have stated that while life is a continuous process, fertilization is a critical landmark because once the chromosomes of the male and the female blend in the oocyte, you have a new genetically distinct human organism.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but again, like there's something about what's happening with the mother and what put her in those circumstances. Like what about cases of rape or incest or things like that?
I mean, I have a lot of embryology quotes I can share with you. But
I'm
a lot
sure
of
you
biology
do,
I'd love to
but
tell you
I
about
think I
it.
got a phone
I would
call
like-
that I got to.
Thoughts on this conversation? Or would you call it a conversation?
No.
No. What would you call it?
You were talking past each other.
What was Noah concerned about? The woman. What was I focused on?
The end.
The baby, the embryo, fetus, right? Now, while we would say this conversation is bad, or we wouldn't call it a conversation, we would say this interaction is bad. Was there something at least better about it than what happened before?
There was less interrupting.
Okay. I actually let him finish his thought before I shared what I had to share.
You were much more cordial and your tone was much better.
The tones were, we're not as heated, either one of us, right? What else?
No name calling?
No name calling.
She didn't call me a Nazi this time.
Wow.
That's a plus.
Yeah, so what you might have noticed is that this was not a dialogue. Because what I was saying, I could have been saying in a room by myself or with somebody else, right? It was not relevant to anything that he was talking about. Now, was what I was saying, were they incorrect, inaccurate facts? No, not necessarily. And they might be something you bring up at a certain point in a conversation. But it wasn't really helpful to who I was talking to in that moment. Okay, let me have another try, and then I want you to evaluate this conversation about abortion. So, Noah, what do you think about abortion?
I would generally say that I'm pro-choice.
A lot of people, when they say they're pro-choice, mean different things by it. So what do you mean when you say you're pro-choice?
I think that there's generally like circumstances where if you're in that sort of situation, then it would be okay to have an abortion, but not necessarily every circumstance I think is okay.
Okay, when you say okay, you mean like sometimes it should be legal?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the circumstances it's legal, but I would say that there's some level that like, say, maybe third trimester or something like that. You should have known what's going on by then and have made your decision, and I would not be okay with third trimester type abortion and
Okay.
stuff.
I totally agree with you. I'm against late term abortion also, and I agree with you. There's a lot of like circumstances related to pregnancy, related to the reasons people choose abortion that can be pretty difficult. So I'm with you there. I totally get that. I'm curious. Do you think you said abortion maybe shouldn't be legal later in pregnancy? It sounds like.
Yeah, I think at that point, like when it can be kind of viable on its own, or maybe you can give it up for adoption because maybe at that point it's far enough into the pregnancy that they can just give birth or have a C-section, then like at that point that's the decision that should be made. But if it's more of circumstances where like they don't have the financial means, or they're in a place in their own just mental health that would be difficult for them,
Okay.
situations like that.
Yeah. And do you think? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I would just say like in those sort of situations before the third trimester, that to me seems like an okay reason.
Okay. And I agree with you. I'm totally, like I said, against that late term abortion for any reason except for if the mom's life is at risk or something like that. In which case, like you said, we could do a C-section or something and
Right.
separate her. Okay. Do you think abortion should be legal? For example, if a woman wants a girl but she finds out she's having a boy.
I would probably say no. I think it needs to be something that like there's circumstances in which that child is maybe going to be raised in a really difficult situation where it's going to put the mother in such a difficult situation that's a problem for her, maybe her own health or even mental health or economics or different things like that.
Yeah, and I'm super concerned about women in really difficult situations, and I want, to work towards a world where we can help people when they have challenges with mental health and physical health and, all of these things to come alongside women in difficult circumstances. It sounds like, I'm curious what you think. Like, do you think women should use abortion as a form of birth control?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think people need to take responsibility for the choices that they're making, but I think early on in the pregnancy, that can be an option when you've still tried to because there is circumstances where someone's done safe sex and then things still happen. And so in those circumstances, if it's still before third trimester, then I would say it's okay then.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna pause this. Does this seem like a conversation that could go on for a little while? Yeah. What do we think? Good, bad, ugly? Thumbs up. Okay, tell me why. Yes.
First off, you wanted more clarification when he said pro-choice. You wanted more clarification what specifically he thought about the issue as well, instead of just going off of what the general statement for pro-choice is.
Yeah. Yep. And how did I seek clarification?
Just asking what specifically, what he.
Asking questions. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. What else?
Building on common ground.
Common ground. Yeah. What were the two words I said somewhat frequently in that conversation? I agree. Right. Now, did I agree with everything that he said? No. But I found things I could agree with, and I pointed them out to him. What were you going to say? Same thing. Common ground. Yeah. Common ground, we would say, is like fuel for a conversation. So let's pretend you're going on a road trip. You're going to put gas in the car in the beginning of the trip. And then you're not just going to do it then, because if you're going to California from Colorado, you're going to need to put gas in multiple times, right? Common ground, finding common ground with someone builds rapport with them, and it helps the conversation to continue because they recognize like, oh, she's human, I'm human, we're having a productive conversation here, and we can keep going. So I recommend finding common ground often. No, you can have a seat if you'd like. So common ground was great. What else was going on in that conversation? That was different than the other two.
Well, I think you were practicing some active listening.
Okay.
So you did a little bit of repeating back
Yep.
what he said.
Yep.
And then even when you're saying, I agree with you, you kind of restated what it was.
Yep.
Which signals to the interlocutor that you're paying attention.
Yeah.
To them. You're actually listening.
Yeah. And how did Noah know I was listening to him?
He said something and you responded about the thing he said.
I addressed the actual concern he was bringing up, right? I also was quiet enough for him to actually talk, right? So in order to listen, we need to be quiet. I'm guilty of this in conversations all the time. I want to just jump in, right? I kind of did that with him at one point. I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. What were you saying?" Right? So we want to be quiet so someone else can talk, and we also don't want to just be quiet so that we can formulate our argument or our next thought. We don't want to just listen enough so that I can have something to refute your thought. I want to actually listen because I care about what you're saying as a human being, and I want to listen to understand your viewpoint. So listening to understand, asking questions. We would say not just asking questions again, just so that I can figure out what I'm going to debate you on next, but asking questions to genuinely clarify what does this person think and why. We want to encourage you to ask two kinds of questions, what questions and why questions. So you might say, what kinds of circumstances do you think abortion should be legal in? What points in pregnancy should it be legal in? We might say, why do you believe this? You always thought about this, right? Like, why do you think that? So we think if you ask what questions and why questions, those are clarifying kinds of questions, and they can help you in any conversation about any topic with anyone in any place, most likely, get somewhere. So in all of your conversations as you whiteboard out on campus with Ratio Christi, what and why? What do you mean by that? It's a great question, right? And again, do you mean this? And then if the person says no, then, oh, I'm clearly not understanding what you're saying then. Because if I can't restate what you think in a way that you agree with me about, I'm not really understanding where you're coming from, perhaps, or at least restating it, right? Okay, so what questions, why questions? There's also a kind of question that we would call a challenge question, because if we want to ask the person more about their view in the hopes that they might change their mind about something, we will get to that, but that comes later on in a conversation once we've actually clarified someone's view, because once you do the hard work of clarifying what someone's view is, then they're more open, perhaps, to you challenging that view. It's a little bit hard to challenge a view that you don't actually even understand, right? Okay, so we call these skills, we call them the 3 essential skills. We think they're helpful, so I'll put them up on here because you got them all. Great job. Ask questions with an open heart, listen to understand, find common ground when possible. So finding common ground is something that's just really great to practice on, whatever your belief is about something. I actually talked to a couple people today on campus who were very staunchly pro-choice in the sense that they thought abortion should be legal for any reason through all weeks of pregnancy because of a woman's bodily autonomy. But we were able to have a conversation because they actually were open to hearing what I wanted to say, and they also engaged in a conversation with listening, asking questions, finding common ground. And it was really great to have these conversations and help both of us think through this issue in the world. So using the 3 essential skills is great. I want you to practice right now using those skills with me. So I'm going to have a view about abortion, and any of you can ask me questions to figure out what my view is. The only question I don't want you to ask right now is a challenge question. So I will stop you if I think the challenge is, and that's just, again, if you're really challenging my view versus trying to figure out what it is. Does that make sense? All right, so I'm Lucy, and I am pro-choice.
So when you say you're pro-choice, so what specifically do you mean by that? Because pro-choice can mean many things. It could be no restrictions on abortion, some restrictions on abortion. There's a variety. So could you please clarify in more detail on your stance on pro-choice?
Yeah, I just think sometimes a woman needs the right to choose an abortion.
And what does she determine that right on?
I just think her circumstances demand that she, yeah.
Can you please be more specific on what some of these circumstances are?
Yeah, great question. I think that when a woman didn't get to choose to be pregnant, she should have a choice.
And when would that be?
When?
Yes, like for example, would it be like a failure in birth control, or would it be something more extreme?
I'm thinking actually about, no, I think like people should be responsible with their choices. Like when they choose to have sex, they should accept responsibility for that. I'm thinking more of like a rape situation when somebody gets assaulted and she didn't get to choose, like say she becomes pregnant, then I think that she should be able to choose abortion.
Do you think there are any time limits on when she can get that abortion? Is there a certain time where the baby's viable and then she shouldn't get that abortion anymore?
Yeah, I definitely think that there should be a time limit. Like I'm comfortable with like first, I think they're called trimesters. I think in the first trimester, she should be able to, but I definitely think definitely not later on for sure. I didn't even know that really happened, but I learned that it did. That's just mind blowing to me.
Okay. Tell me if this is a challenge question, 'cause and it's just burning in my mind. Are you aware that what you've said so far is exactly the position held by a lot of people who call them pro-choice?
Pro-choice?
Yeah, sorry, pro-life is what I meant to say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Okay, pause. Yeah, so
Is that
you
a
might bring
challenge
that
question?
up. That is a question that you could ask later on in the conversation, but right now, because it is kind of challenging, like, I'm
That's what I thought.
curious why you hold that view going deeper, right? Somebody summarize Lucy's view on abortion right now.
So far, there should be access to, Lucy believes there should be access to abortion when rape is involved.
During what point in pregnancy?
First trimester.
First trimester. So you've narrowed it down. This is a person that thinks abortion should be legal, or we didn't actually, we can go into, like, some people think it personally should be allowed, but like, some people are personally okay with it in the first trimester, but it shouldn't be legal. Like the law piece is a little different. So we want to clarify like personal belief versus law belief, whatever. But I use the legal question just because it helps people really get to, okay, some of the more details of that. So when you think about someone's view, it's helpful to know what they think about abortion personally, what they think about it legally, and then at what point in pregnancy do they think it should be legal and for what reasons. So the one thing that maybe you don't know about my view is rape the only time I think abortion should be legal? So what's a question you could ask me to discern that?
Like you exactly said.
Like I just said, right? Is that the only circumstance you're concerned? And I might say, yeah, rape or life of the mother or something like that, right? Okay, I'm gonna do another persona, and this will touch on your question. So I am Sarah, and I'm pro-life. I see that you're here on campus. It's great that you're talking about abortion.
So when you say that you're pro-life, of course, that could mean many different things. Because it could mean, do you want? Of course, you want some restriction on abortion. That's what pro-life means. Do you want all restrictions on abortion? Do you believe that there should be restrictions on only a few cases, or what are the specific circumstances on that?
Yeah, that's a lot of questions there. I'm curious. I think just generally what I mean is like I think that human beings are valuable, and I think like they're created. Like I'm a Christian, like you guys, some of you are. Like I think that God created humans in His image, and they deserve protection from people trying to hurt them. But where I get a little bit stuck is that I just think there are some times a woman should get to choose to have an abortion.
Okay, totally agree with what you said, that we're made in God's image and that human life is valuable. But I'm curious to know, what are those circumstances that a woman would be allowed to get an abortion?
I would think like when she didn't have the choice to become pregnant, she should be allowed to have an abortion. Up until what point? Like a
Trimester date.
Yeah, I think pretty early on, just enough so that she has enough time to decide after this tragic, traumatic, awful, horrific thing happened to her. But like at some point, I think at some point, it's too late at that point for her. So maybe first trimester.
Is what you've said so far more of a personally held belief that you'd like apply to yourself, or is it more of a legal belief of
Yeah, like
what we should have legislated?
Yeah, like personally, I think if I went through that situation, I would have my baby. Like, I would think if anything good can come out of this situation, this could be a good thing. But like legally, that's where I kind of get confused because I just think that it should be legal in that first trimester for that reason.
You kind of alluded to the unintended as being sexual assault and rape. Is that kind of what you were getting at with that?
Yeah.
Okay. And are there any other circumstances where abortion would be permissible?
Maybe I don't think this happens very often. I think most of the time we can have C-sections or some other way that we care for it. But maybe if the only thing you could do to save a woman's life if she was dying and she was pregnant was to like have to kill the child, then maybe I'd be okay with that. Okay, pause. What's my view on abortion generally? Sarah's view?
Pro-life. I would call that pro-life.
Describe it to me. I'm okay with abortion being legal when?
I see.
Sexual assault, rape, or life of the mother.
Yeah, so what do you notice about my view and Lucy's view? They're the same, right? Even though we define them differently. So Sarah says I'm pro-choice, Lucy says I'm pro-choice, Sarah says I'm pro-life, but we actually have the same exact view on abortion when it comes right down to it. We use this example just to point out that people use a lot of different terms, a lot of different ways, and I can't just assume that someone, when they say pro-life, actually thinks we should protect by law human beings before they're born. They might personally be pro-life, but not think the law needs to interfere. They might be libertarian or something like that, right? Or they might think I can't make someone else decide what to do, even though I think I'm pro-life, right? Pro-choice people also, we might assume when they say pro-choice, they're one of somebody that thinks abortion should be legal for any reason at any point. And if you're having a conversation with someone that is actually just thinks abortion should be legal in a very limited amount of circumstances, limited amount of time, that's a very different kind of conversation. So you just want to kind of know where the person's coming from. So great job asking questions. I can tell some of you have done this before, asking questions about just clarifying my view. Now, when you get to the point where you know someone's view a little bit more, then you can challenge the view a little bit if they're open to that. So, okay, so other thoughts about 3 essential skills before I keep going? Where could you find common ground that maybe we didn't find common ground in those examples?
Never mind, when you said without those examples, I was about to say like one of the examples.
Did you want to say what you were going to say anyway?
Sure, so perhaps you could, when it comes to finding the common ground, perhaps the person who is speaking cares a lot about the woman and what's best for the woman.
Yep.
So you could possibly go into what could work best for the woman, like how she feels after getting an abortion maybe.
Yeah.
Or just what's the word I'm looking for, real resources that the woman can look out to, or other alternatives that are not abortion, what resources are available.
In my case that I was just talking about, what was the concern that the woman had? And how could we have found common ground with it?
She was sexually abused or assaulted, agree that that's wrong.
Yeah.
And she needs some special care.
Yeah, we could say, and we don't know if the person we're talking to went through that circumstance. I know I talked to a lot of women and men on campus who tell me about something that happened sexually in their past related to intimate relationships. And so it might be their story that they themselves were raped, got pregnant, maybe had an abortion, didn't. We don't know, right, until we ask the questions to find out, and then they share their story with us. But we can find some common ground with, you know what, I agree with you that rape is a horrific violation of a woman's bodily autonomy in a violent way. And I'm against that, and I think that every woman that's gone through that ought to receive all the care that she needs to get through this traumatic thing that's changed her life forever. She will never not have this experience, right? And so we want her to heal in the best way possible. We want her to have all the resources she needs, and you cannot find too much common ground with someone who has that concern. Does that make sense? So in a conversation, wherever you can find that common ground, I agree with you that this should not happen to women, and I'm terribly sad that it happens to a lot of women, etc., things like that. Finding common ground. Okay, so I'm gonna say some things I want you guys to find common ground with me. So don't challenge my view. Let's assume you've already found out what my view on abortion is, and you're talking to me about concerns that I have. So I'm just gonna say something, and all I want you to do is find common ground with me, okay? So I think abortion should be legal because it's really hard to be a single mom. Anyone?
I've had some friends who ended up single moms through no fault of their own, and yeah, it was really hard. I agree with you.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's a start, right? And you never have to agree to the point where it's like, oh man, you're gonna convince the other person it's impossible to be a single mom somehow, right? Like you said, your friends became single not by choice, and they rose to the occasion, hopefully with people's help around them, right? And were able to continue caring for their children or helping other people care for their kids, right? So find that common ground. You don't have to agree with everything someone says, but let's say I think abortion should be legal because the foster care system is absolutely horrifically messed up.
I agree that there are a lot of problems with the foster care system, and one of the things I would like to see is maybe more support on that end.
More support and like helping kids in foster care.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. And you might, like, sometimes I point out, like, hey, the foster care system exists because we live in this really broken world where parents can't always care for their kids. They just maybe aren't equipped to. And maybe that's not through any fault of their own, right? Maybe something's happened to them. Maybe they have a drug addiction or something where they've made some choices, but other choices have happened to them. For whatever reason, they're not in a position to care well for a child. And so we take that child out of a bad situation, place them in a better, hopefully what we hope is going to be a better situation. Unfortunately, within that system, there's problems with resources, there's difficulties, and there's people that take advantage of kids in foster care in abusive situations, that kind of thing. And I'm against that. I want every child cared for, protected, whatever, right? Something along those lines. Okay. What if someone said, I think abortion should be legal because this world has way too many humans in it, it's way overpopulated, and I'm really concerned about that.
I agree that overpopulation is like an environmental concern, a problem that humanity needs to face.
And you can't, and you may or may not agree with what the person says, but you can maybe find out. Often if you're worried about overpopulation, you're concerned that at some point we're running out of resources in this world, right? And so that might be their concern. And you can agree that there's some places in the world where kids don't have something to eat right now, and that's a problem, right? You can just find that common ground even if you're like, well, I don't know if it's really overpopulated or not, right? Okay, great job. Common ground. Okay. Let's say, I'm gonna bring Noah back up here. Actually, not quite yet. 1 second. Okay. When it comes to abortion, there's one central question that is really important to focus on if we want to be honest about what happens in an abortion and who's involved. Most people will agree that abortion kills something. And the answer to whether we can kill something depends on what it is. So I'll demonstrate this way. This is an illustration that Greg Kokel from Stand to Reason uses. Let's say that I am visiting some of my 12 nieces and nephews, right? And I'm doing dishes at the kitchen sink because it's a family reunion and we have tons of dishes. And I'm busy doing dishes and my nephew comes up behind me, he's 7, and my nephew says, Auntie Christine, can I kill this? Now I can't see him because I'm busy doing dishes in front of me. So what is my first question gonna be to him before I answer his question? What is it? Because to know if it can be killed or not, I need to know what it is. So if he answers, Auntie Christine, it's just a spider, I'll be like, yeah, get that thing away from me really fast, right? If he says it's the neighbor's cat, I'm probably gonna turn around pretty quickly and say, no, you cannot kill the neighbor's cat. And certainly if I turn around or hear that he has his sister by the neck, I'm gonna go, wait a minute, forget about these dishes, we need to talk right now, because what brought us to this moment in history where you think killing your sister is a great idea, right? Because to answer the question, can I kill it, we first have to ask a previous question, which is, what is it? So the central question when it comes to abortion is, what is the unborn? What is the unborn, what's growing in a woman when she's pregnant is the central question. So lots of conversations about abortion are not focused on that question. You'll notice, well, actually some of you tell me, what are some justifications you've heard about abortion? Just throw them out to me, go ahead.
I've heard like that something only becomes a person after they like start having a heartbeat.
Okay, there's some developmental stage somebody points out of the human, okay?
Yeah, pretty much what she just said. On the more modest side, it's they are not living yet. They do not have a heartbeat. They do not have a mind. They do not think consciously.
Yeah.
But more on the immodest side, it's clump of cells is another side as well from that.
And these two that we just talked about, I'm going to put in one category and I'll tell you what that is in a minute. What are some other justifications that you'd love? What were some of Noah's concerns you could bring up? Go ahead.
A strange one that I heard today was that it only has a soul after it's born.
Okay. Yeah, people kind of define like the human body and then when is the human body and the soul, like how does that all happen? There's different views on ensoulment, like when a soul enters the body, all of that. Even within the Christian community, there's different views on that. Yeah.
Noah had concerns about the mother's life being difficult.
Yeah.
And it was gonna get more difficult if she has this baby.
Yeah, so circumstances, he was concerned about poverty, for example.
Yeah.
Concerned about, so resources. Okay, here are some justifications for legal abortion. Now, some of these justifications you'll notice actually address the one central question of what is the unborn, and some just assume the answer to that is the unborn is not a valuable human. So when you're talking to someone about abortion and they bring up a justification, you kind of want to think, what kind of justification is this? So some of these are, it's her choice, abortion prevents abuse, the unborn's not alive, she was raped, the world's overpopulated, it's just a mass of cells, she's too poor to care for a child, and the unborn can't feel pain. These are some of the things people say. There's obviously a lot more of them. So they fall in two categories, generally speaking. So I'm gonna point them out to you. One of the categories is, it's on topic, it's arguing that something about the unborn makes it not human, but at least it's talking about what is the unborn and addressing the unborn more specifically, versus something that's off topic. I would call it off topic. It's just assuming from the get-go, you could call it begging the question, like, is that the unborn's not human, okay? So for example, what do you think about this justification? Do you think it's on topic or off topic? Yes,
Off topic.
off topic.
Yeah.
Why do you think that?
It's not talking about whether the unborn is human or not human. It just kind of like there's an implication there, but it's generally more something that like, oh, because it can't feel pain, we can justify killing it.
Okay.
I'd say it's on topic if very nihilistic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would agree with you actually that it's on topic. I think it's a little tricky. This one is actually tricky to me, but it's on topic in the sense that we are saying that the unborn, because it can't feel pain, is not a valuable human being. But we're at least talking about something related to the unborn more directly, right? But we're answering like, what is the unborn? Well, the unborn is something that can't feel pain. It is actually addressing that question, not in a way that we might agree with necessarily. Also, there's a lot of differences of opinion right now in the medical community of when the unborn can feel pain. Some people are saying as early as 12 weeks, there's the apparatus there that the neurologic system is developing at a certain level in which pain is actually perceptible. And people do maternal fetal medicine specialists give anesthesia to babies during surgeries in utero separately from the parent. And so it's interesting, this idea of pain. How about this? She's too poor to care for a child.
Off topic.
Off topic. I would agree with you that it's off topic because what are we talking about in this? If you could sum up the concern in one word. What'd you say?
Mother.
About the mother, but what about it?
Being too poor, like not having
Poverty,
resources.
right?
Yeah.
We're concerned about poverty in that, right? And it's not like I'm not concerned about poverty. I'm actually very concerned about giving women the resources they need. So I'm not saying that concern's not important, but it's not directly answering the one-sided question about what is the unborn, because we're talking about poverty. How about this one? The world is overpopulated. Off topic. It's just a mass of cells.
On topic.
On topic, right. Because it's addressing what is the unborn, well, it's just a mass of cells. So because of that, it's not a human being or whatever. But at least we're talking about what the one central question is. Now, what is the unborn is not the only question we have to answer when it comes to abortion. There's a lot of really important questions we have to answer, but it is something that helps clarify the issue in a certain way. So think about these and where you might categorize them. And I'll show you kind of where we would put them. See if that makes sense. So you see if the ones over here at least are addressing what is the unborn, what's going on when a woman's pregnant inside her. Versus over here, we're talking about things that relate to pregnancy sometimes and also relate to a lot of different things in the world, right? I'm concerned about any child growing up in poverty. So it's important, I think, to find out where you're at in a conversation. Noah, can you come on up here now? Let's say that you're talking about a lot of these circumstances, which you can find a lot of common ground with people about, and help them recognize, I actually am concerned about a lot of things you're concerned about. But when it comes to abortion, there's this one question that I feel like we really need to answer that we're not talking about. Well, you could just tell them, hey, let's talk about this one central question. What is this? What is this unborn, right? Or you could help the person recognize themselves that they need to answer the question, what is the unborn, and at least think about that. How would you do that? Well, we're going to employ something that Scott Klusendorf with the Life Training Institute says to do, which he says to trot out a toddler. And it's a 4-step process I'm going to walk you through quickly of doing this in a conversation to bring the conversation from an off-topic justification for abortion to at least we're talking about the unborn, because we need to know what that is if we can say abortion should be legal or not. Okay, so Noah, the first step is we're going to actually agree. So remember at the end of the conversation we had before, Noah was concerned about poverty. I think abortion should be legal in the case of poverty. So Noah, it sounds like poverty is important to you, and I get it. Like I think it's really tough to raise kids when sometimes you don't even know how to feed yourself, right? Spoil the economies, I can't buy a house, like how on earth am I gonna do this, right? So I get it, I'm super concerned. about kids growing up in poverty also. So I get that. So find common ground, that's the first step. Second step is I'm gonna apply the exact situation he's talking about to a 2-year-old. And I'm gonna say, Noah, this might sound kind of strange, but just go with me here. I'm curious, like, let's say that there is a woman living in poverty and she has a 2-year-old child. And she doesn't know how she's gonna feed this child. Like, she can't pay her bills, she's about to get evicted. Can she kill her child or take her child to a pediatrician to have her child killed?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Totally agree with you. Yeah, absolutely, she can't do that. And this might sound like a weird question, but why can't she do that? This is the third step. You ask the person why.
I would say because at that point it's a human being, and so that it's deserving of equal rights as any other human being.
Okay, totally agree with you. A 2-year-old is a living human being. Totally agree with you. And we can't kill living human beings. So, question for you, like, if the unborn is also a living human being, then would you agree with me that we can't kill the unborn simply because of poverty?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I didn't really think of it that way though before.
I'm assuming you think maybe the unborn's not a living human being.
Yeah.
In the same way, at least. Okay. Do you see how we went from the conversation of we're talking about poverty, which we care about, but then we're actually talking about the one central question. So this is a step that you can use. I use this a lot in conversations to like apply the justification to a situation outside the womb and see what the person responds to and say, can this human be killed in this situation? Can we, in a foster care situation where I don't know the outcome and this kid may end up in a really terrible foster home and it's a 2-year-old, can I kill the 2-year-old just because it might end up in a really terrible situation later on? Well, no, of course not. Well, why is that? Well, because it's a living human being. Oh, I get it. So the fourth step, we would call it the ah step, and it's not like, aha, I got you. It's hopefully the person's going, I see that, like, probably we don't disagree about poverty. What we disagree about is this a living human being or not? And then we're on topic and we're talking about abortion in that way. So agree, apply, ask why, okay? And then you're gonna answer the question, and I'm gonna pass these out to do this. I'm gonna pass these out. Actually, do you mind helping?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry if some of them are. I'm gonna walk through this with you one page at a time. It's just something you can use in conversations if you want to. Feel free to use it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Don't open it up more generally until I tell you to, because there are some things in it that I want you to be prepared before you see them. So this is just a dialogue tool that we use today on campus. You can see that we are inviting people into a conversation about unplanned pregnancy and abortion, or unintended pregnancy and abortion. And the first page goes through some concerns that we're concerned about related to abortion. So you can tell there's some common concerns and some less common but really important concerns that I want to address that people are concerned about. And once we've gotten the person to recognize, look, pro-life and pro-choice people, generally speaking, we don't disagree about poverty. Most of us don't want to see kids growing up in poverty. But the pro-choice person, if they don't see this as a living human being, thinks that abortion helps in the case of poverty because it prevents a poor child from coming into existence. Versus a pro-life person, because they see the unborn as a valuable human being, they think that the only thing abortion does is it actually takes a poor living human being out of existence by killing her. So we don't disagree about the circumstances of poverty. We want all kids to not have to grow up in that situation. But we disagree about who the human is and how you solve the problem of poverty. Does that make sense? Okay. So circumstances, let's say you've trotted out the toddler, then you get to them and they say, well, no one really knows when life begins. That's when we talk a lot about biology. Some people, when they say no one knows when life begins, they mean no one knows like scientifically when you have a new human organism. But some people actually mean no one knows when you have a human organism with an equal right to life or with rights or dignity or value. So if someone's talking about biology, then you might go into a little talk about embryology. If they're talking about philosophy, you might just summarize the biology to make sure we're talking about the same thing and then jump to address the philosophical concerns. So you'll see in here, we've got some pictures related to biology. and embryology. And science can kind of answer in the cycle of human reproduction, when do we have a new human organism that's genetically distinct from its parents? And the thing I'd like you to look at here is page 14 of your interactive guide. When it comes to biology, and again, don't look further in this just yet. So page 14, if you want to remind yourself about human embryology, biological facts related to human development. We like to focus on what we call the 10-second pro-life apologist. And you might have heard me say earlier, we say if the unborn is growing, isn't it alive? And if it has human parents, isn't it human? And human beings like you and me are valuable. So things that are living have living characteristics, right? And that's humans, but also other types of creatures and plants and all the kinds of things. Like living things have living characteristics. So they grow by cellular reproduction, they metabolize food for energy, right? They respond to stimuli. The unborn demonstrates all of those things, if we look at it. And it's different from like a sperm cell or an egg cell. A human embryo is a human organism where all of its parts are integrated and it's developing sort of on its own, right, from the beginning. So stages of development, I use this page a lot. And then next, in this brochure, the next pages are graphic, and so only look if you want to see that. But I asked people, would you like to see would you be open to seeing pictures of what abortion does? Now, when it comes to sharing graphic images about abortion, the pro-life community actually has different views on this. Some people don't ever want to use graphic images ever, and other people want to show everybody graphic images of abortion because they think this is such an important human rights issue that everyone should see what happens in an abortion. And at Justice for All, we just want to start by saying, can we agree that in a one-on-one conversation with someone's permission, where you ask, hey, are you open to seeing graphic images of abortion? They say yes. Can you agree with me that they could play a role in that case? And so often that's the case. Now, you can open the flap, and I'm going to put it up on the screen, just warning it is graphic. I might have taken it out, I can't remember, but this is that page right there. We don't show these images to condemn anyone who has participated in abortion. Abortion is not an unforgivable sin. So if someone's experienced that, I don't show that to put their sin in their face. I show the pictures to clarify the facts about abortion in a way that you can't do without the pictures. So does anyone know the story of Emmett Till? Okay, somebody summarize it for me if you want.
From the South that got beat to death mercilessly and they hung. Kind of pictures of it got out and sparked a outrage like blacks across America.
Yeah. So the thing that was, and I'm going to take this. The graphic images are down. Just FYI. Actually, if you don't want to look away for 1 second, now they're down. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy from Chicago that went to visit relatives in Money, Mississippi, and essentially had an interaction where later he was accused of whistling at a white girl, and he was essentially lynched, murdered, and the story of Emmett Till became a story that the newspapers covered, and they did something that they hadn't done before, which they showed images of what happened to Emmett Till's body, and they showed an image in the paper of what happened, and it put a name and a face on racism, basically, because the word racism had lost its meaning back then. In the same way, the word abortion has lost its meaning for a lot of people, and so graphic images can play a role in like putting a face on abortion and opening the casket on abortion per se to just show this is what we're talking about. Again, when you talk about abortion in graphic detail, there are abortion clinics, the one up in Boulder, every so often, the remains of whatever was removed in an abortion were taken out, were given to a mortuary, that was incinerated, and then that was buried, at least in some instances, in a cemetery up in Boulder. I don't know what happened the rest of the time, but something is going on there, right? And so ignoring that isn't going to help us when we're talking about this topic. But facing it for what it actually is, in the same way that people had to face what racism was by seeing what happened to a human being because of it, helped people then develop a heart for that human that was impacted. And I don't have pictures I'm gonna show you tonight of Emmett Till, but you can look that story up if you wanna learn more about that, okay? So, when it comes to human development, some people get confused because they think, and this is from a philosopher named Richard Steth, he says that people are concerned about abortion because they think that the way humans are created is kind of like cars on an assembly line. So when you're making a car, you kind of like put it together piece by piece, and it's a little bit tricky to know, when do I have a car, right? Is it when I put an engine in something? Is it when I paint it at the end, or is it when I drive it out of the building, right? When is it a car? The unborn, though, it's not constructed. So we don't take a heart from the outside at week 3 after fertilization and place it into the unborn. The unborn actually develops it on its own, right? Directed by its own processes, because it's a human organism. It's also not a part of something. It's its whole human being with its own parts. So, like if I scrape off skin cells from my hand, am I killing human beings? No, but there's human cells involved in that process, right? And at one point those cells were alive, so living and human, but they weren't an organism. Versus the embryo is a human organism. From the time it comes into existence, all it needs is time to develop. So it's a little bit more like a Polaroid. You guys know what Polaroid pictures are? Where you take a picture, you start with a white film or whatever you call it, right? Put it in the camera, you click the button, and then you might have just a smudge to begin with, right? But if you give it enough time, that picture then develops. But it's actually the same picture once it's fully developed that it was before. You just didn't have the apparatus to see it yet. So the unborn is more like that than it is something that's constructed. So like cake is constructed, a pizza is constructed. People might bring up in conversations about abortion things that are constructed. And we have to point out the difference in human development is that humans develop from their own, right? They initiate their own development as long as they have their nutrition and they're growing and they're being cared for. So this is just a tool you can use. Biology, we answer the question, can you know when there is a new human being or not scientifically? And then once we do, we can talk about, does that human being deserve equal rights and equal treatment to the rest of us when it comes to the basic right to life or right to not be killed? So that's a question we have to answer. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking right now. I'd love to hear your questions, and if you don't have any, I'll dive into something else, but thoughts and questions.
Just conversations I've had, people who like distinguish embryo, zygote, fetus.
Yep.
What's the best way to approach the differences of those types of development?
Yep. So the question is, how do you people will refer to something as a zygote or an embryo or a fetus, and how do you distinguish those points in development?
Or I guess like the other logic would be like, well, that's just a zygote, it's not an embryo yet, it's not a fully functional organism, like it is literally just a unique cell, and how do you say like that?
Yeah. I would ask them more questions about what do you mean by these terms, right? Scientifically, science tells us when something's an embryo, it's 8 weeks, or from fertilization till 8 weeks, it's embryo, and then it's a stage of development, then it becomes, we call it a fetus, then we call it an infant. Those are stages of development that we can agree about. It's just a term. Like we use the term fetus and embryo for lots of different living things, right? So things that reproduce sexually in the way that humans do, we have these same terms, but they're not human embryos, they're not human fetuses, they're not human infants, right? Does that make sense? But when they say it's not really a fully functioning organism, I would go into, well, what makes something a fully functioning organism, right? And in what ways is the unborn demonstrating these things that we know are characteristics of living things? Does the unborn have human parents? Well, then it's human. And is all of its parts like organized in a way that it is directing its own development in a different way than like a skin cell would do, right? In a different way that a sperm cell would do, an egg cell. They serve a function in human reproduction, or they might be part of a human body, but the unborn is its own entity with functional parts, and those parts are integrated. So that integration piece is really important when it comes to organisms. And again, we talk about organisms outside of humans, right? We've got frogs, we've got all kinds of different kinds of organisms, right? And so scientifically we can define what that means. But it's a good question. What else? Sorry, whoever's next. Go ahead, I don't know who raised their hand first.
Just from personal experience, using like the toddler argument.
Yeah.
It does direct to like what is a fetus? Is it a living human being? It also, in personal experience, tends to like raise the temperature of the argument.
Okay.
Do you have any practical tips to like keep it calm while doing so?
Yeah. So you're saying you've tried this trot out the toddler technique, but it seemed to raise the temperature on the conversation versus lower it. Has anyone else had that same experience? Yeah, a little bit. I think anytime that I see in a conversation that someone's really concerned about something and that happens, sometimes I just take a step back and even just observe, oh wow, I can tell that it seemed like that hit something in you. Can you tell me more about what you're thinking right now? Because clearly something's going on. Now, maybe the person doesn't feel like you're addressing the concern that they have enough, so maybe it's let's find more common ground, like back up and find common ground, right? Sometimes it uses this in a conversation multiple times with different examples, and they're like, I know where you're gonna go with this, but it's not what I wanna talk about right now, right? And you can choose in that moment, okay, what would you like to talk about in this? Because I can tell you're really passionate about this, and I'm concerned, and I really want to have a conversation between us as humans, and it's not my intention to make you upset in this or something. Yeah. So maybe it's like where it's being used. I don't know. I wasn't there in that conversation. Was there anything particular you remember from?
It just felt like I was like speaking in bad faith, like not taking. They were taking their argument to some far extreme that it should be placed under.
I think that, right. And they might, right, there's conversations where someone might think you're acting in bad faith right now because this is not what I'm talking about. And that is kind of the point we're trying to make, is we're not talking about the same thing right now, because you would agree with me in all of these situations it's wrong to kill human beings. But we're using that justification to kill a human being over here and usually I'm using it after I've already established they actually think it's a human being, right? But by human being, I mean just biologically at that fundamental level. If they agree, I'm like, we agreed this is a human being, we agreed that killing human beings is wrong or something. But sometimes it just clarifies that they actually don't think it's a human being in the same way that you're thinking it is, if that makes sense.
I'll sometimes preface the trot the tot with kind of pointing out, hey, I'm gonna ask you something, and it's not because I don't think we're already in agreement on this, because sometimes when you bring up that counter situation with the trotting out the tot, they're like, really, you think I'm gonna say that that's okay to have that, like to kill the toddler? Like, I generally will kind of say like, hey, I'm gonna ask you something, I think I already know what your answer is because you're a reasonable moral person or something like that. And then they realize, okay, I'm not trying to say that I think they're okay with killing a toddler when poverty's happened. I'm just using that to point out what the main issue is, which isn't poverty. It's whether it's a human being or not. And so kind of pointing that out, because I think that's sometimes why the temperature gets raised, is because they're like, you're trying to say I'm a Nazi without saying I'm a Nazi. Like,
right.
So
if we're speaking in a world that human beings before birth have been very dehumanized, to the point that this world generally thinks it's actually okay for their lives to be ended. And it's because either they're not a human being at all, we're not seeing them as, or they're just, maybe they're a human being and I think they even deserve equal treatment, but I actually think my body and my rights supersede that. So we wanna know, like, where's the person? Do they think it's a biological human being? That's one conversation. Do they think it's biological, it doesn't have the same equal right to life than we do? Then we're talking about philosophy and what made someone valuable as a human being. And then there's the conversation of, well, I think it's valuable, I care about it, I think it's biologically human, but I think bodily rights are super important. And that's a whole conversation. We've got information in the interactive guide about that. I would recommend at any point in a conversation where the temperature continues, invite the person to say, do you want to keep having this conversation, A, and just say, I see this as really concerning to you, I get that, and like maybe is there something I am missing that you're really concerned about that you'd like to share with me right now? Because going back and we can find so much common ground with women in really difficult circumstances who are facing impossible choices in their view, right? Their life will never go back to being what it was before they got pregnant, because either way, they're either going to carry this child to term and maybe parent it or place it for adoption, or they're gonna choose an abortion, but either way, they're not going backwards, right? And so they're in this space that's challenging and difficult, and often they just need someone to come alongside and help in that case. But yes, go ahead.
I've personally in conversations gotten a bunch of like crazy hypotheticals sprung on me, if that makes any sense. To be fair, I think people who use this particular one were just trying to win the conversation.
Just trying to win the conversation.
Yeah, but like one of the ones I've actually ran into more times than I thought I would was like if you were in a burning building, would you save like a jar of 1,000 like fertilized human embryos, or would you save one toddler?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I get that one sprung on me more often than
yeah.
that seems normal.
And you're in a conversation related to abortion, someone says, hey, let's say an in vitro clinic or whatever is on fire and these embryos are going to die, and you think embryos are valuable human beings, right? And they'll say, let's say you might raise the stakes on that and say, like, let's say it's your 2-year-old that's going to die in the fire or this vial of embryos or however they're carried, right? Now, if I answer the question, well, absolutely, I'm going to save my 2-year-old, does that mean I don't think that the 1,000 embryos are valuable human beings? No. It just means I'm picking one and I can only save. And we generally will help human beings that we have some kind of relationship with, right? So, but because I'm choosing this over here doesn't actually mean these don't have value at all. It just means we're in a situation where we're choosing, right?
Higher, maybe like it's a higher level of connection with the one versus the embryos.
Say that again.
Maybe it's like I have a higher level of connection with the one versus the
Yeah.
embryos. It's more human reaction.
Right. Yeah, and that, I mean, happens all the time, right? Somebody, and you could say, like, let's say there's a 2-year-old in trouble and I know the 2-year-old, or maybe I don't. 2-year-old, I use this. So let's say there's a 15-year-old in trouble and a 2-year-old in trouble. At the same time, somebody's gonna hurt both of them. Who am I probably gonna try to save? Probably the 2-year-old, because I think the 15-year-old can defend for itself a little. But that doesn't mean I don't think this 15-year-old doesn't have value and dignity and should be protected. It means I just have capacity to save one person right now. So, but yeah, there's a lot of hypotheticals. Your point was lots of hypotheticals were being brought up. I actually bring up a lot of hypotheticals too. I was just talking to some people over dinner. This is really interesting about this conversation is we think very hypothetically about it, but it actually affects human beings very really when it comes right down to it, which is why we're concerned about it. So it is one thing to have these conversations. It's another to take that and apply these thoughts that we're having to actual things happening when women are pregnant and doctors or medical providers are choosing to act in a certain way related to patients. Generally speaking, the field of obstetrics, right, is concerned about caring for pregnant women as patients themselves for their own sake, but also caring for them so that their children can grow and thrive and we can get through pregnancy together until there can be a safe delivery and both can continue to grow and thrive. And that's the point of that, and a lot of that is what we want to focus on, right? And we have other times where in pregnancy we go in and induce the death of one of them. And that's the question we have to grapple with. What is happening there, and when is that a good moral choice for someone or not, right? I agree with you though, hypotheticals are brought up a lot. And sometimes I want to bring it back to the real world and say over 500,000 abortions have been reported in Colorado in the since 1967 when Colorado first decriminalized abortion. So what were those? What happened there? And how did we get here? And actually bring it back to real life. Because you can have trolley cases all day long and we can think about violinist arguments and things like that. And we do this. And we have there's information in your interactive guide about how to interact with different types of arguments. But often we have to take that argument and say, is this actually analogous to what's happening in pregnancy or not? And if so, okay, what principles apply, what don't, that kind of thing. Good questions. Anything else? Yes.
I know that in some conversations, like you get to a point where you're boiled down to like basic essence of like what is life, what is body,
Yeah.
So where's a good point to take the conversation from there?
Yeah, I was in a lot of conversations today where we just fundamentally agreed with each other that we disagree about who this human is. If I thought about my nephew right after he was born, he filled up my arms, I'd heard my sister as she went through labor, difficult, right? But she's holding this beautiful infant in her arms who's sweet and tiny and just tiny fingers and tiny toes and like just this amazing miracle that happened at birth is what a lot of people get to experience. But the reality is in this world, we look at humans before that point and we wrestle with what we can do to them. And that is the fundamental disagreement of some people think it's okay to intentionally end their life for certain reasons. And as a Christian, I think we are called to defend people that can't defend themselves at whatever stage of development they are. And that their lives have value and dignity. And what that means in pregnancy is what do we do when a woman who has dignity, rights, value, and her body is super important? I'm never going to tell her you don't have bodily autonomy. You absolutely do. And your right to your body is super important. And I think you should get to make choices about a lot of things related to your body. I just think that I'm glad as a woman my bodily autonomy doesn't extend to the point that I can actually use my body to harm someone else. And so I'm glad we live in a world that will limit my bodily autonomy sometimes for the sake of someone else's bodily autonomy. And so I want to talk about in pregnancy, we have a human being with bodily autonomy. And then if you agree with me, scientifically, we have another human being or twins or triplets or multiples, right? And they also have a right to their body and a right to let's not kill them, right? So how do we interact with that when we've got this unique situation that you can't replicate in other parts of life, right? I can't think of another example besides pregnancy where this is the case. So, but yeah, we get to this point where this is what we disagree on. And science can tell me when a human being exists. It can't tell me why it's valuable or why I should care about it in the same way that I care about other humans. And that's where I turn to what the Bible teaches about human beings and who it gives authority to decide when a life should continue or not. And that is not to humans. That is just to the Lord, right? So, yeah, agree though. You get to that point. Where do you go?
Yeah, actually something you mentioned like at the very beginning of the presentation was, you know, how the Bible talks about like children are a blessing, blah, blah, blah. I think that's a really good point, and I guess I'm just kind of wondering why isn't more of a central focus.
Why isn't more, yeah.
Yeah, because I just feel like that's a really good argument.
There is, yeah, I talk about this a lot, actually, students, when the term parasite comes up, because you'll see this a lot where people will refer to living human beings as parasites. And you could say, okay, there might be some similarities, like a parasite lives inside someone's body, uses their nutrients, right, and continues to grow. Like, there's some similarities. There's also a human being in utero is actually a normal part of human reproduction. It's not a disease state, right? It's normal in human reproduction for sperm and egg cells to come together, form an embryo, that embryo to implant in a mother and continue to grow and develop. Restate your question for me one more time. You said, oh yeah, why do we not focus more on the beauty of that child? Yeah. I think humans respond to things that are good and true and beautiful in the world, right? And a part of what we can do as Christians is paint a better picture for the world than what they're experiencing. So what they're experiencing is traumatic difficulties related to very intimate subjects, right? Related to deeply personal things. And they may be, a lot of people I talk to have grown up in families that have been broken. They've experienced what it's like to be abused, neglected, abandoned, those kinds of things. They felt like maybe they were a burden to their parents growing up. And so they look at the future of children and they think, I don't want to have kids, or I just don't think anyone should have to do that because I don't want anyone to feel like they're a burden. And there's a reason why people have gotten to the point they are. But if we can paint a better picture of a world in which children are cared for, children are valued, marriages are a place where men and women can feel safe with each other and be equipped to care together for children. A child can have a father and a mother, and that can help their growth and development. I think there's a place where we can continue talking about this blessing instead of, like, your experience I think was really hard, and I'm really sorry that you had to go through that. But yeah, I think it should be. I think it ultimately is fundamentally what we are disagreeing about. Is, are children a blessing, or are they just a burden to my life? And do they get in the way of my plans and my dreams and my desires and my body? Because certainly pregnancy is going to have impact on a woman's body, right? That's natural. That's part of normal reproduction. And I don't want to negate that. I think it's really important to say, yep, there's a lot of things going on, and your body's not going to be the same after you deliver a baby. And what else is happening there? Right? Like, it's not just your body's changing. Like, you've got this infant now that's depending on you in a whole new way than it was depending on you before. And I'm going to raise you to a high calling of how can you care for that infant in the way that you can make the world a better place in that way. Okay. One more question, and then I know it's time. So go ahead.
Do you think men and women should have different roles in the discussion about this? And if so, what?
Great question. Yeah, the question is, do you think men and women should have different roles in this conversation? And if so, what should that look like? Is that essentially, when you say different roles, what do you mean?
Just because they have different perspectives on the situation, do you think they should approach it from different angles? Or?
Yeah, I think men and women generally do approach things from different perspectives by virtue of their own experiences and their own differences in their bodies, right? So I think it's great for anyone entering the conversation about abortion to acknowledge that pregnancy impacts a woman in a way that a man will never experience, because a man his body is not designed to get pregnant, right? So I think that acknowledging that there's a significant difference is really helpful when you're talking to someone, especially like today. I had some people say, well, it looks like there's a lot of men here. Like, you know, I don't understand that. Why do they care, right? And if it was legal for doctors to kill 2-year-olds in our state, and you're a man watching this and you're a woman watching this, both of you could speak into that situation because you're both human beings and it's 2-year-old human beings being impacted. So if in abortion a human being who's pregnant is impacted, then you as a man and a human being can address her concerns and help her as a human being, right? You can also speak to what's happening in that abortion to another human being. But the question again is it a human being? Because human beings can speak into a lot of issues. Like a man, for example, can speak to the issue of rape, even if he's never experienced it himself and or is likely not going to statistically, it happens more frequently, right? Where unfortunately men take advantage of women, right? And so not all men, obviously, but a man who cares about women can speak into that even though they statistically experience that differently, right? Does that make sense? So just because you're a man or you're a woman, it doesn't mean you can't have a say when a human being is involved. But I think the way you approach it can be really significant. So I talked to a lot of people today who are very concerned about, I think that making abortion illegal is just men wanting to control women's bodies. And so if you look at a world where women have grown up for the last 50 years with legalized abortion, and they have been told this is a right that you have, and it's a fundamental right, it's intrinsic to who you are as a woman. And therefore, we fought really hard. We got to this point where this right was made a constitutional right. In my county in Colorado, I think it was roughly 81% of people voted that it's a constitutional right for a woman to have an abortion. Only 18% of people voted against that. So we've got this ingrained in our society. And so I can see if I grew up in that, and that's what I was told. If I see someone on campus asking me something that I thought was settled a long time ago, I would immediately be like, what are you doing? We're going backwards. Do you even care about women at all? Do you realize I didn't used to have the right to vote, and I finally got the right to vote? I didn't used to be able to own property. I finally got to do that. Now you're telling me about this thing that I thought I should be able to do, and you're going to say I can't do it? We have to be able to to address these concerns and say, actually, I really care about you as a woman for your own sake, not just because you might have a baby inside you one day. You're not an incubator, you're a human being with dignity, worth, and value. And a man can say that, and sometimes when people have been harmed by someone of the opposite sex, it takes a good man in their life to help them understand that not all men are out just to restrict me and my rights, right? We just think that someone else has rights in this picture as well, that we have to figure out what to do with. It's a good question though. I will stick around if you have other questions, but I want to respect your time, and I know you guys end at 8:30. There is a yellow card at your table. This is just a form that I would really appreciate giving whatever information you want to give, but especially if you want to write comments about what about tonight meant to you, feel free. If you are interested in learning more about this topic, you can choose to receive email updates. We don't send emails very frequently, maybe 2 or 3 times a month. But if you want to learn more about that, you can sign up for those kinds of things. We also have some information about if you want future interaction with JFA, if you want to bring JFA to your church or have these kinds of conversations with Bible study group or something like that. There's ways for you to participate. If you want to do outreach with us and find out when we come to Mines campus, for example, you can just check outreach on the bottom there. So feel free to please at least take a few minutes to kind of give me some feedback about tonight and what was useful, what was not, that kind of thing, and that just helps us as we move forward. Do you want to close out here, or?
I can close this out. First of all, I wanted to thank JFA for being here. So, thank you guys for joining us on campus, for tabling and putting this presentation together for us. We really appreciate it. I have a couple announcements. One is going to be from our very own Donald, so I'll hand it off to him.
2 things. One, if you want to get our a newsletter, not newsletter, but a notification for what's coming up next week, then I've got a list here. Like these 2 fellows signed up, donated $10,000 each. I'm asking for money, but if you want to know something about what we're doing, that's helpful. And about next week, I've got David Spiegel. He's a philosophy professor, and he's going to be talking about the differences between objective approach to ethics or subjective approach. A lot of our conversations out here, like we like to use this question here, can you be good without the existence of God? And we get a lot of response on that. But a lot of it goes, other questions go toward ethics. And so it's great to have that distinction in your mind, what an objective ethic is or a subjective ethic. So it's very foundational, but very helpful too. So that's next week. Here.
Sort of bouncing off that, we tabled this week. We're also going to table next week because in 2 weeks we do not have a meeting or anything because that is fall break. You will not have school, so don't show up. But we will be having the fall break trip. Again, Grayson mentioned that. It's going to be manuscript study. If you're interested, please sign up. The links are in the group me. But next week, like I said, we're going to be tabling. So we will be sending out a poll pretty soon about that. If you're at all interested, please join us, even if it is just for a couple minutes and just talk with us. We'd love to see you out there. It's always a joy to talk with people on campus. And if you've never done it before, I'd encourage you to at least stop by and consider it. But besides that,
Oh, I just have one more thing. We have some resources on the table over there if you want to read
Yes.
stories from conversations on campus or have resources. If you know someone that has experienced an abortion, we have something written with some stories from women who've had abortions and things like that. So feel free to take anything on the table, make my load lighter going home tonight.
Also, how do you access that poll?
in our group me. If you are not in our group me already, talk to me, Grayson, Donald, or realistically anybody who's in the group me, and they will be happy to add you. That is where we do most of our communications. We talk about what we're doing on campus, announcements for when we're doing things, and just general information about what we're doing in the club. So if you are not already a part of that, please consider hopping in that. We don't spam you with messages, so you don't have to mute us. But, yeah, but besides that, I think
One final thing.
final thing.
Christine, I think you had that sign up sheet.
Yeah, again, if you want to stay in touch with us through JFA, you can just, well, at this point, just turn in a yellow card, that'll cover that.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you for remembering that.
Final things all over with? Okay. Okay, then I'm gonna pray us out and then you are all free to go. Lord, I just thank you for tonight, the great conversations that we got to have on campus today, and also what we learned tonight, that you would be able to grow us in it, and that we'd be able to apply it in our lives, go out and have good conversations with people and ask good questions and really build that connection with people. I just pray that you give us wisdom as we use this, and that we would have discernment on how we approach these conversations, and that we do it with gentleness and respect. I just thank you again for the time that you give us tonight, that we get to talk about these things in such an open setting. Once again, I just thank you for all the things that you give us. In Jesus' name, amen. You are free to go. That's next, too.
I seriously
guys.
Anytime you want to
You don't think they have any connections on that?
I don't know. I didn't know my head back. Hey, there's this organization in Kansas.
Oh, I thought you meant first.
Yes.